All right. Well, this is exciting. I always like to try new things, and I think it's really exciting what we're all doing in Greeley in general. So I wasn't exactly sure of the format, and so I had a couple ideas that we could do, but and so feel free to interrupt me anytime with such a group like this. I'm happy to take questions anytime. So obviously, what Carol was just describing, so I tell patients, I'm a cancer doctor, right? So that's what oncology is. And I just want to kind of give you a little bit of journey about my own journey in oncology, but also where cancer is headed. So how many of you know someone has been affected by cancer, or you personally been affected by cancer? So almost everybody, right? So I mean, right now it's the second leading cause of death in this country behind heart disease. In about 10 to 15 years, it'll probably be the leading cause of death, but we're hoping to change that. And so people always ask me, why did you go into oncology? Isn't it depressing? And I said, no, the exact opposite. I wake up every morning just so inspired by my patients. People I know who've been affected by cancer. Nothing amazes me more than the human spirit that I meet day in and day out. And so when I was in training, you could go into all kinds of things. You could go into cardiology and anesthesia or whatever, but I kept coming back to my cancer patients that I would meet, and they were just the nicest people, and I connected with them, and I said, I want to do that. I want to take care of that human spirit that I would meet every day. And as I got into oncology and in cancer therapies, this was about 15 years ago. I'm not that old, but I mean, a lot has changed in the last 15 years, and it's tremendous. And what drew me into treating cancer patients is the patient and the patient's families. I quickly realized, seeing myself, I could say, it's one of the few specialties left in medicine, I think, that you know your patient and you know their families and you know their families' families, and I love that. And I think that sense of community, what you're trying to do here is great. And in medicine, we're very fragmented. One doctor does a scope on the right nose, the other doctor does a scope on the left nose, right? And I just was like, man, I wanted to do more, but I wanted to be able to take care of patients and their families, like Carol was talking about. So that kept drawing me back into taking care of cancer patients. And boy, the science was tremendous. I mean, at the time, this was again 10, 15 years ago, and you look at the progress, and I wanted to talk to you about the progress in cancer. Tremendous. I'm still astonished. It's hard to keep up with, in all honesty. So between the connections that I make with my patients, I get invited to graduations, I get invited to birthday parties, I see people in the grocery store, and I guess maybe old-fashioned, but I like that part of medicine. And so that's really what drew me into oncology. The science behind it, though, has also been tremendously captivating, and I want to just tell you about that and kind of help you understand. So as I was finishing the Army, and I did a lot of research with different drug companies, and realized very quickly, wow, this is really picking up pace here. And so as I was getting out of the Army, I did 11 years in the Army, and in hindsight, I'd be retired in about 3 years by now if I had stayed in. But I didn't. I got out, and we didn't move at all. We stayed in 11 years in one place, which is not usual in the Army. And so my wife and I were like, we want to look around. We want to go someplace. And there was no oncology program here in Greeley at the time. And Banner really kind of brought me here to help start this program. And at times, when you're stepping into something pretty new and really without anything, it really was almost like Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams. And not just the cornfields on West Greeley, but it was the idea of, what am I doing here? I'm leaving this gigantic military army with everything I have and everything I need, and to start a program. And so we've been very fortunate, and we've been able to grow this program, and we're very proud of our cancer program here. And so we want all you to know that we have your backs, okay, in the sense of we very proud of the MD Anderson partnership that we have. So I'll tell you about that as well. So in the Army, you used to say, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them, and then tell them again what you're going to tell them, right? So that's what we want to talk about today. So I don't have any slides or anything, but I just wanted to kind of give you a journey of kind of where cancer treatments have gone, and maybe just a couple stories that still stick with me. And so one story is, Every year in July, I get an email, and I look forward to that email. And it's from my first patient that I saw 15 years ago. And he was a retired lieutenant colonel. He actually had stage 4 colon cancer, okay? So, as we all know about different kinds of cancer, stage 4 is always the worst, right? And, we treated him many times in various situations, and boy, I almost look forward to that email. And I do keep in touch with him throughout the year. I do want to know what's going on, but he'll always send me an email, and it's very simple. Dr. George, thank you for another year. And wow. And and first couple of years he would do that. And then when I left the Army, he would send me cards. I'm like, man, that is amazing to me that here he is. I left the Army 6 years ago now, and he sends me that email. It's a one line. Thank you for another year. As if I'm the one who gave it to him, which I wasn't, right? I mean, I'm humble enough to know that, but that recognition of what we're doing with people's lives and how we affect that is truly amazing and really humbling. And so multiple stories I could go on like that, but that is one that sticks in my mind. I look forward to that email in July, not because but I like to know that, okay, he's doing good. And so the patient connection is really what drives us. And I think in oncology and in cancer, you'll find that most of the cancer doctors who treat cancer patients, it's really truly the connection. So we have a wonderful team over here just down the street, 2 blocks. I just drove straight from work, so 3 blocks down the street. I'm a medical oncologist, so I treat with chemotherapy. We have radiation oncology who do targeted therapy, and we even radiosurgery and cyberknife. You may have heard all those terms. We have gyn-onc, so that's women's cancers. We're the only ones in northern Colorado to have true women's cancer surgeries, so ovarian, uterine, cervical cancers. They're specialized. That's all they do. Before we started that program, you'd have to drive to Denver to get an ovarian cancer surgery. Okay. Actually, just this week, we have a very highly trained cancer surgeon who will operate on very high-level cancer surgery. So liver, esophageal, pancreas, those are difficult, hard surgeries. Up to now, we drive to Denver, but now it's right here in our community. So as this Greeley development's going on, we're doing the same thing in our cancer program. And so very highly trained, highly skilled people, but we love our patients. And so that's what drove me into oncology, is that patient connection. A lot of times, and you see people a lot, you see them weekly sometimes, and all of a sudden when they're done therapy, it's a joyous occasion. We have them ring a bell to celebrate that. And I sometimes, I can tell they're getting a little emotional. And I'm like, it's okay, what's wrong? And they'll say, well, I just gotten so used to coming in here. You're part of my family. What am I going to do? We'll see you in 3 months. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere. But, we really do connect. And our nurses, our chemo nurses are tremendous. Such heartfelt, loving, caring nurses always inspire me. And I know my patients are in good hands when they're getting their chemotherapy. And so I do want to give you that sense that even though I'm standing up here, this is an entire team that we're talking about. And we're here to serve you. We're here to serve this community. We are bringing very high-level cancer care to this community, or have brought high-level cancer care to this community. And again, very proud of that. So the MD Anderson issue, it took us about 4 years in the making, and about 50 trips from Houston to here. There's a lot of patients that go from Colorado to Houston to MD Anderson. Well, you can walk 3 blocks now, right? So we are all MD Anderson faculty. We have MD Anderson research protocols. The way our clinic is even remodeled has been from the MD Anderson protocol. So the care you're getting here is an MD Anderson level care. Right, so we're proud of that, and I don't mean to boast too much, but that is the reality. That's right down the street, and that is part of this development. Right, it's part of we have access to the best cancer care in the country. So moving on to other things too is just cancer in general. So one thing I have done is I've really watched and learned from cancer patients. And the relation that you need to happen. I mean, when I walk in that room, I shake someone's hand. That look in the eyes. I mean, there's about 30 seconds there that I need to connect with them, right? Because what's happened already, right? They've gotten a call, maybe 1 or 2, probably at 6 o'clock at night from one of their primary care doctors. Hey, you got a minute? Right? They've gotten that call. Yeah, yes, something's there. Yes, we need to look into something more, right? They've gotten that call. Probably a couple days later, they've had another scan scheduled or a biopsy scheduled or something being done to them. A couple more days later, right, they're waiting for some results, either a call or something has happened. Oh, yes, it is what you think it is. Yeah, we'll take care of it. We'll get you in to see our cancer team. You know, a couple days later now, we get them in pretty quick. Finally, they're sitting there behind that door that I'm about to open. So I recognize that, and I think all of us do, that, hey, this isn't some doctor's appointment that you're just going to, right? All that has gone on. Meanwhile, in addition, what are we going to do with our work, right? How long? What's going to happen to me? Can I go back to work? Who's going to pay for this? Is my insurance going to cover? How, where am I going to go? So all this is going on, right? And all of a sudden I walk in, and I got about 10 seconds, maybe 30. We will take care of all this, right? So that is probably the hardest part of my job. The science and the cancer treatments are complicated as heck, but that initial connection that's the hardest part of my job, in all honesty. And I enjoy my job. I enjoy it a lot, but it's hard to, I know I see it every day, and in many terms, I'm trying to connect with them, treat their cancer, but there's a lot of other things that we all have to deal with. And so, again, with our team, we have financial navigators who can help us with that. We have care coordinators. We want these things done quickly. Nobody wants to wait days or hours for results. And we have teams that talk about your cancer care together in what we call a multidisciplinary fashion, where everyone's talking about your case. You don't even know. You're not even there. And so that connection is really what drives me. And I wake up in the morning, again, I come home just amazed, truly amazed with that human spirit. It's not an easy thing, and we have the ability to do great, wonderful medicine, right? But that human connection, we need to really continue to focus on, realizing very early that these are our families, these are our neighbors, this is our community, and people are just you shake that hand, and all of a sudden, okay, we'll take care of it, right? That's what we need to let people know. And so with oncology, so there's very complicated cancer cases. But at the end of the day, what we want you to know, too, is that we are here to take care of you, and we care about you and your families and all the other processes that go along with the big C word. And, in the 10, 20, 30 years ago, we used to call cancer victims, right? Victims. And we don't say that anymore. You're cancer survivors. You're cancer, cancer survivors, and so that reality is when I initially talk to a patient, there's various stages of this. The initial diagnosis is very hard. Then we talk about therapies, the side effect of therapies, and I'll tell you about how that's changed in a second. This is a long journey, and I attribute this to, I like analogies, so I attribute this, my role. So if who's been whitewater rafting? Any of you guys have been whitewater rafting? Where have you guys gone whitewater rafting? Pooter, Arkansas. Anyone in the Grand Canyon? Anyone that level? What season have you gone whitewater rafting? Like when the water was high or when the water was low? No. So you've gone when it was high. It's pretty scary, right? And cold. So when you got in, so you booked this trip. You walk up to this river that's raging, right? This is my analogy of what what the cancer patient goes through, and then this is my role. So you walk up to this thing, and oftentimes you don't know the level of the river. You don't know how deep it is. Sometimes you don't even know where it's going, right? You don't know where they're going to pick you up from. You hope they pick you up, right? And then they often make you carry the raft. What I always sound like, I paid for this. I should just go sit into the thing, right? So you carry the raft or whatever, and luckily it's pumped up for you, but that's fine. But you get in, and what's one of the first things you do, either on the bus or as you're getting off? What are you doing? What are you looking for? Who are you looking for? You're looking for the guide, right? You're like, okay, who the heck is going to get me down this thing and bring me back here, right? So that's my role in this, right? I'm the whitewater rafting guide, because actually the patients actually are doing a lot of the lifting, right? But that first 10 seconds, they're looking to say, okay, can this guy get me down that river? But what the other thing is too is what happens in that whitewater rafting adventure, if you want to call it that. So you don't often know where the true end is. You understand that there will be an end. Now, that might be a cure for some. It may not be for others. But you go through, and the guide says, and you've picked up an oar for the first time in your life, probably, right? You never you pick up this oar. You're like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to just listen. And a lot of times he's actually back there working hard, right? I mean, you don't even notice, and you're just, oh, this is great, taking pictures, and then all of a sudden you hear the falls and the rapids. And you're like, ooh, I better listen to this. What's going on here? So you've gone, everything might be fine in your journey. Oh, maybe once in a while you'll hear those rapids. You listen to the guy a little closer, right? And he tells you and you're like, oh man, I gotta really do this now. But then you let up. It was fine. That one was great, And that keeps going, right? It just keeps going like that. That's kind of what I see myself is, right? I'm a guide in this journey with you. Sometimes I'll be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Sometimes you'll be doing it with me. Sometimes you won't be listening too closely, but sometimes you will. And at the end of the day, you have to trust that guide to get down to that area, wherever that's going to be. And that end might be different for everybody. Sometimes it's, I just need to get to my grandson's graduation 2 months from now. Sometimes it's, hey, I want to be cured for the next 10 years or 20 or 30 years. So that idea that, we're in this boat with you, because I don't want anything to happen to the boat. I'm in it with you, right? So that's kind of how I see this journey is, and that's simplistic, and I'm not trying to patronize anybody, but the reality is that's what this is, right? Is we're in this together. There'll be times when you are, paddling faster, harder. You hear those rapids coming. You're scared about what's going to go on the other side. But then I'll tell you, look, we'll go right down this way, or there's this treatment, or we have this radiation, or whatever. And those rapids all of a sudden are behind you. And you actually look back and you're like, actually, that wasn't that bad. It sounded so worse than what happened to me. And it was like, a little small rapid, right? And that's oftentimes what this cancer journey, at least, it's simplistic, and I realize that, but there's a long journey there because the time of diagnosis, the therapies, the side effects. The therapy ends, you still have side effects, but you're recovering. And then, then there's the cancer survivor journey, which is a whole nother journey. Right, Gene? So I told this story the other day with Carol. We've been in a lot of meetings together, Carol. But the cancer survivor journey is even a more interesting journey because during therapies, we have all this stuff. You're in that boat. You got this guide. You're doing whatever you're supposed to do. You're going through rocks, And I tell patients this sometimes is not a smooth ride, just like whitewater rafting. Sometimes it's perfect. The water's great, sun's out, perfect. But sometimes it's cloudy, it's rainy, you're going over the rocks. The water's too low, you're having to drag your boat out of the water, or it's too high, you're flipping over, and you're coming back, and you're getting wet. So yeah, it's not a smooth sail sometimes. But the cancer survivor journey is always an interesting thing because, again, I told you about patients who want to, they get used to us. This becomes part of their routine. But what happens when that ride ends in a whitewater rafting journey? Wow, you're like, wow, that was actually kind of fun. I wish I could do that again. It's going to cost me $200 to do it. But, but not that you want to go through therapy again, but the idea that you've had this structure in your life. And so the cancer survivor journey, I tell this story about, it's an old Greek mythology. This is one of my favorite stories. I tell a lot of my patients this, but it's called the Sword of Damocles. Have you guys ever heard of it? Maybe some of the professors from UNC, I don't know. So Damocles was a king, and one of his men in his court said, "Man, it's so great to be king. I wish I could be king." He said, "Okay, I'm going to throw a huge feast. My gestures and food and dancers, everything. It's going to be a huge feast. You can come to the feast, but you're going to have to sit in a special chair I have for you." And what happened was the king tied a sword above him, and the sword was dangling like these lights almost dangling from a little thin thread of sword. And he was not a slave; he was not imprisoned. The true kind of meaning of the story is, with great authority, there's great fear, right? Because the king wanted this guy to know, hey, it's not so easy to be king. But I twist a little bit, because that's what a cancer survivor's journey is almost, right? You have this sword hanging over you. It's not touching you. It's never touched you. It may never fall. It might. It may never fall. But you have this huge feast of life to go after. And so, in the story, this gentleman chose to just kind of watch this sword above him, swinging there and hanging by a thread, but it never dropped on him. It never fell on him. And he didn't enjoy the feast. He didn't enjoy the party that was set before him. And he was more worried about that thing falling than actually. And so, again, simplistic, and I'm not trying to patronize anybody by that story, but the reality is that's a similar story for cancer survivors, is that fear of, boy, man, I don't want to go through that again. That wasn't a fun whitewater rafting trip. That was terrible. I don't want to do that again. I hope this never comes back, but what do I do? How do I prevent this from coming back? So, that's a constant. So I see a lot of patients who are 5, 10, 15 years out still, and so and our technologies are a little bit better to pick up cancer at that stage, but in recurrences, but maybe not as great as they should be, and so it's hard. We don't have a test. We don't have a blood check, which we're working on. They're working on that, and maybe in the next 5 years we will have a blood check for even small cells, which is the holy grail of all cancer follow-ups. How do you know my cancer's not come back? And so. Anyway, so that's kind of that journey of treatment and that whitewater rafting of, turning here, going here. It's not quite the trip you thought it was going to be, and then there's the journey of survivors. And so those are things that I've just learned, and kind of that's things, again, everyone has a little bit different philosophy on how we treat patients, but that's a journey that it's very familiar, I would say. No matter what your primary diagnosis was, that those phone calls, that waiting, that fear, we understand that, so let me talk to you now about where cancer's going, where we've come from. In the last 5 years, and really in the last 3 and 2 years, there have been an enormous, tremendous leaps in how we treat cancer. When I was training, melanoma, okay, we live in Colorado, a lot of sun, a lot of melanoma. It was one of those cancers that we could not treat. It was not sensitive to the chemo that we gave, and we knew it, and we gave an old drug. It was called interferon, and I still picture patients who got interferon, and I wish I could go back and ask them for forgiveness, because that's a terrible drug. But that's all we had, and it made people have the flu for a year. What a therapy. Barbaric. That was 10 years ago, and what we found with diseases like melanoma that were very resistant to chemotherapy, there's a whole class of drugs. They're called immunotherapies that are the exact opposite of our traditional chemotherapies. And what they do is, again, analogy. So in your car, you have a brake. Right? You have a brake, but all of us don't have the emergency brake or the parking brakes anymore, but a lot of cars have that parking brake or that shift brake. So there's different kinds of brakes, right? So what cancer does, our body's normal mechanism is an immune mechanism where if something's abnormal, we heal thousands of times a day. Our DNA is a zipper. It zips up, zips back. It's what an amazing mechanism, but it goes every day. It fixes things, fixes a little break. However, over time or exposures or whatever, that's how cancers develop. Is one break isn't fixed, all of a sudden 2 breaks aren't fixed, or 2 little zippers aren't, like the zipper in your pants, or your coat. how it gets all, tangled up or whatever, the zipper comes off. So our DNA is doing constant repair. And when that doesn't work well is when we get cancers. So that's sometimes over a lifetime. If there's a genetic component to this, a family history, that happens earlier than later. But all cancers fundamentally are normal cells gone bad, right? And when they develop like that, they have a way to hide from your immune system. They actually pull that big brake up on your car, not the little brake that we stop our car with, but the big brake, right? And your immune system can't do a thing about it. So this cancer grows and grows and grows. Then it grows and spreads and spreads and grows. And, so there's a lot of mechanisms for cancer, but that's a simple analogy. So melanoma was one that it was amazing. You couldn't treat it. No matter what chemo we gave, no matter how we tried to suppress the immune system, thinking we can kill the cancer, melanoma would grow. And about 4 years ago, these immune blockers came out, these immune therapies came out. What they do is they take the brakes off your own immune system that the cancer has put on. It's like a cloak, if you're a sci-fi, what's the guy who's the cloak guy who'd walk into the walls, There's a cloak over these cancer cells that your immune system doesn't even know it's there. Pretty amazing, but your immune system has no idea it's there. There's a brake, big master brake in the car, and these drugs actually take that brake off, and then all of a sudden your body can see it, and then your body can fight it. So that's a completely novel. That wasn't around when I trained, and that's a completely novel way of treating cancer. And what we found was that. So melanoma was the poster child. So, President Carter, I think he's 92 years old, he had melanoma to his brain. And he got these drugs. I'm not his physician, but he seems to be doing fine. Last I read a report about him, he sounds like he's in complete remission. But that's what those drugs do, is they take that cancer that was cloaked by your own immune system, take the brakes off, and allow your body to, oh wait, that's not supposed to be here. How'd that get here, right? And go and fight, and then all of a sudden the cancer's gone. Like, that's unheard of. In my world, that's like the Jetsons, that's way out of space here. And so then bladder cancer. Bladder cancer was very hard to treat. It still is, but sure enough, those drugs work for bladder cancer. Lung cancer, head and neck cancer. You can go on and on. And so what we're finding is it actually doesn't matter as much anymore whether you have lung cancer or prostate cancer or whatever cancer. But what matters now is and that's one example, the immune mechanism. But what matters now is these certain mutations with certain targets. So I tell my patients it's like telling me you drive a car, you have cancer, right? Versus I drive a V6 Chevy pickup with leather seats and tow capacity or whatever. The specifics matter. So in a few years from now, it really won't be far off where we are treating the mutation of the cancer as opposed to its site of origin. Right, lung and breast and colon, and so that's exciting. That's exciting to me. When I see these new drugs, they work way better. They work in diseases that we've never been able to treat, and they have a lot less side effects. People can go into complete remissions. We're debating in the oncology world: are they cured? Is stage 4 melanoma curable? That blows my mind because that was not the case, never has been. And so that's all in the last 2-3 years. I use melanoma as an example, and now there's these multiple classes of these kinds of immunotherapies. You may have seen commercials. Opdivo is big on the lung cancer commercials. Keytruda, Tecentriq. You've probably heard, you may have heard these, but that's the reality, is they take that cloak off. They don't actually damage your immune system. They don't suppress your immune system. You don't lose your hair, right? That's cool. But your body then is turned back on to a cancer that has been hiding for years, probably, if not longer. That's tremendous. That's exciting to me, right? So people say, "Why'd you go into oncology?" Well, this is cool. I mean, we are, and that's 2 or 3 years. Who knows what it's going to be 5 years from now? And so that's one example. You could do another example in multiple myeloma. The list of therapies for multiple myeloma 10, 15 years ago was a small list, a handful of diseases. I actually just saw a patient today in the hospital with multiple myeloma. I took him 3 pages of drugs that I could give him. I mean, that's tremendous. And then transplant. And so now, again, is myeloma curable? It never used to be. Maybe it is now. In leukemias, very hard diseases to treat. You may have heard of these CAR T cells. I don't know if you've heard of those. Another immune mechanism where these leukemias, especially in pediatric leukemias, are even harder to treat, more resistant. We're giving these immune therapies, and people are going into remissions when nothing else works. So, we're at the point in oncology where many diseases, it doesn't matter many times where they came from. What matters is the certain mutations. And then the ability to get these chemotherapies are a lot easier. So people do better, a lot less side effects. I tell patients this is like a light switch. It's either on or off. Your immune system is either going after this or it's not. So for me, the traditional chemotherapy, I could tell you what happens on day 2, what happens on day 9, what happens on day 10. I could tell you when your counts would come up. I could tell you what's going to happen 3 months from now. These things are interesting because these drugs, you don't know. I mean, we don't know sometimes. Okay, are you going to have an effect in your liver? Is it going to affect your skin? I mean, your immune system's head to toe, and so when they're on, it's on, and you sometimes have some side effects, but it's very specific to the immune system as opposed to organ function. So people do better with these. They live longer with these, and so that's an exciting thing when you talk about new therapies. And so, again, just to kind of bring us back, why do I do what I do? Again, I told you about the patient connections, and I could probably speak longer about those, but that means a lot to me. When I go to the store and I see my patient, their husband, their wife, or not husband and wife, but maybe husband or wife, whatever, and their children, and I see them in the store, and they come up and give me a hug, and my kids always know, hey, was that one of your patients? They always ask me, yeah, that was one of my patients, and I'm proud of that. I love taking my kids places, and I see patients at the Stampede here, and I see patients, and that I love that. I love that sense of community, and so we do it for our patients. The science is tremendous. It's rapidly changing. And in a few years from now, we will be treating things, who knows, in many more different directions than we are today. And so, again, that journey is difficult, but we have a lot of new therapies, and I think people will do better with them. Just a last plug is prevention, right? Prevention still matters. So this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I actually do the Real Men. Gina always talks me into it every year. I can't get out of it. The Real Men wear pink. I'm not wearing pink. I'm wearing purple today. But anyway, I wear pink every day, usually for the American Cancer Society, for the breast cancer awareness. Breast cancer is a great example of screening and prevention. The cure rate for most breast cancers is very high, 98% if it's caught early. And that's what mammograms do. Not all cancers have that kind of screening. But again, the cancers that are available to screen, you should screen. They work very well. Breast cancer is a very good example of that. Mammogram, colon cancer is another good example of that with colonoscopies. Cervical cancer with pap smears, good example. So those are good examples of cancers that we don't even see a lot of advanced stage anymore, oftentimes because of the screening. What we see is a very early, so now the pendulum's shifting to, are we over-treating these women who have the earliest of early breast cancers, and are we giving them surgery, radiation, and we give them estrogen blockers? How much of that do they really need? All right, we've gone from preventing, catching it early, treating it full bore, coming back now and saying, well, maybe some of these women don't need all that therapy. So that's an interesting thing. Is sometimes less is more, right? If you certain age groups and certain kinds of cancer. So there's still a lot to learn, and so the American Cancer Society with the breast cancer research, all that's my point with prevention is it works, okay, in many cancers, but also the research funding, the federal funding, the private funding, that's how all these things are developed. That's how these immunotherapies are developed. That's how all these drugs are developing. So, when you look at the overall cancer survival and cancer cure rates in the last 30 years, they've only gone up. They've only gone up. All comers, everybody. Now, not everyone, I understand, but when you look at the people who get diagnosed and over years and years live through that, the overall cancer cure rate has gone up. So we have, I think I remember the statistic, there's going to be more cancer survivors than there are cancer patients, I think by 2030 is what they're estimating, meaning people are going to be living longer with different kinds of cancers. And again, that cancer survivor journey is an interesting journey that we need to be very cognizant of. But I think I just wanted to give you some highlights, and I'm happy to open it up to questions. Anything cancer related, I'm happy to help you out with. If you have any questions or any comments on your own journeys, I'd love to hear them. Those stories, those stories are real, and go ahead.
There's a myth out there that Big Pharma does have many of the cures, but it is economically to their benefit not to make them available. Your perspective?
Yeah, I don't know that that's true. I mean, I think I don't know. I guess there's a lot of myths out there. I guess partly is a lot of the research isn't necessarily only done by Big Pharma. So a lot of the big universities and MD Anderson, the research is collaborative. Okay, so we're part of many networks of research, thousands of patients. That's not necessarily owned by the pharma companies. But a lot of these drugs are developed in a basic science lab by a PhD, like a UNC lab or something, and a PhD student says, "I wonder, let's try this." So eventually that becomes a drug, and that becomes Big Pharma. But I don't know that that's the case. But
that's good to have that language to
yes.
Hand to somebody that says. The other thing, would you respond a little bit to the advantages of MD Anderson coming to NCMC? We have a good oncology department now. Mm-hmm. How does this further benefit?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So
patients in a large area, not just.
Yeah, so I mean, earlier I said, we truly are raising the bar, raising the level of cancer care in this community. So we pretty much, short of a transplant, we can take care of almost pretty much any level of cancer that you have. Okay, so I started this program 6 years ago. There was nothing here, and when we started talking to the MD Anderson folks, we had to meet a certain level of a bar every time to get to the next level. So everything we've done already in our cancer program has been geared to that. So right now, when you're a breast cancer patient, we have multidisciplinary clinics, meaning we bring you into one room. It's hard enough to get to one appointment, but oftentimes you got to see me, you got to see our surgeon, you got to see radiation. We do all that in one day. So we do multidisciplinary clinics, meaning you come into a room. If you're newly diagnosed breast cancer, you come into the room, we come to you. So that's different. You don't have to go appointment one day, take off another day of work, take off another half day. All three of us will come to you. You sit there, we'll take care of it. And so that's different. That's a big difference from an MD Anderson standpoint. We all get together and talk about this in the multidisciplinary tumor board. So the level of care is very geared towards disease site-specific. So lung cancer is our next target. GI cancers, women's cancers. So we're kind of subspecializing in that realm. So that's one issue. The access and our partnership with MD Anderson in Houston and in Phoenix. So if you want a second opinion, you don't necessarily have to fly to Houston. We can actually call into their tumor board, present your case for you, and see if there's any new data available right away, within a week, right? So we have access to our partners in MD Anderson, in Phoenix, and in Houston. So that's another issue is access to that care. The third big thing is the surgical specialty. So I told you there's 2 gynecologists. We're the only, so Banner and we have one in McKee and one here, Dr. LaCour in CMC. And we have the only gynecological oncology program. So that's women's cancer, right? So that's ovarian, cervical, uterine cancers. They do the surgeries, they do robotics, they do the robotic surgeries, very high level surgeries. And that's the only, so if you want an ovarian cancer surgery outside this hospital, you're going to Denver, okay? And nothing else in Northern Colorado has that level of gyn-onc care. Another issue is the research. So I'm actually our head of our research program. So we are bringing in a lot of trials that are from Houston, from Phoenix. All these new drugs start as trials. So the access to those trials is a very key, important part of our program. I would say that those are probably the big 4 areas.
Cancers that typically 10 years ago would be considered a death sentence, such as pancreatic cancer, has that also advanced?
Yeah, so not quite as much. So pancreatic cancer, yes, has made some improvements. I do think these drugs will get into something like pancreatic. There are still some that are still very hard to treat. So I'm not painting a completely rosy picture up here. Yeah, pancreatic cancer is still a very difficult one. The techniques for surgery have improved. The techniques for delivering radiation have improved. So that's improving. I don't think there's a lot of work to do on pancreatic cancer. Small cell lung cancer is another good one. I'll give you an example. Small cell lung cancer, very hard to treat, very aggressive kind of cancer, hasn't responded to a single thing in 50 years, right? There's a trial now with that standard therapy and the immunotherapy. That's perfect for small cell. So it's changing. But those 2 are probably the 2 I'd tell you that those are still the hardest to probably treat. Yeah.
Can you talk about targeted gene therapy?
So yeah, so targeted gene therapy as far as chemotherapy. So the immunotherapies I just told you about are more, again, taking that big shift break off, right? Letting the body kind of take care of things. The perfect example of targeted therapy is CML. Have you guys ever heard of CML, chronic myelogenous leukemia? So about 20 years ago, so I went to school in Philadelphia, so the Philadelphia chromosome is what this is called. So CML is a great example because most cancers involve hundreds, if not thousands, of various gene mutations or protein mutations. CML has 1. So 20 some years, probably 30 years by now, in the 90s, they can't, so with CML, it's a we have our 23 chromosomes. With CML, 9 and 22 somehow overlap and form a new gene. It's called the Philadelphia chromosome. So it's called BCR-ABL, and that's the mechanism of disease in CML. Somehow a 9, somehow 22 connect, form a new chromosome protein. That's what CML is. So it's a leukemia formed from that one protein. So that gene, we knew what the gene was. Well, that's great, right? We have one gene, let's get one target, let's make it a pill. That's what happened. They did that, we did that. So there's a pill, the first one was called Gleevec, and what did it do? It disrupted that protein, okay? And we knew that was great, but what we didn't know, it actually reverses that. Like that's cool stuff, right? I mean, that's like, okay, now you have a gene abnormality and now you don't. So that's the ultimate gene protein, where there's one problem, and this, again, CML is a very unique diagnosis for that, but when we treat CML, man, now we have five pills that we can give people, and they go into remission, and now we have 30 years worth of data, and now where we're getting it is those people who were diagnosed 20, 30 years ago, can some of them come off? How many of them can come off that pill, right? And so so there's been studies looking at wow, they've been in remission for 20 years. That's awesome. But they're still taking a pill every day. So they're not quite cured. They're taking a therapy. So they've done studies looking at that, and it looks like about half of those patients are actually truly cured, which means half have to go back on the medicine. But that's interesting. I mean, that's a leukemia, and they took a pill, and they got cured from it. That's awesome. I mean, so that's the ultimate. Now, so CML has its own special category in all of our hearts, because that's the be-all, end-all of all cancer therapies. You take a pill, and this gene goes away, you're cured. That's awesome. Other kinds of therapy. So for breast cancer, bring it back down to the real world, because CML is not that common, but it has this great, wonderful cure. So breast cancer, for example, HER2 is a gene that increases the cancer's ability to grow and spread. It makes it more aggressive. So also about 20 years ago, Herceptin, which is a monoclonal antibody, that's IV, and that's a very targeted therapy. So so we call all of this chemotherapy, just so you know. So there'll be chemotherapies, but then there's chemotherapies. So there's monoclonal antibodies. So if you want to hear about the science of that, that's pretty interesting. They actually take mice and help kind of inject these proteins into mice. The mice will actually make the antibodies attacking that protein, which is the HER2. Then they develop that in a way that can be given to humans. So that's what Herceptin is. It's a monoclonal, meaning one antibody. Okay, so it targets, and clonal means it's made from mice, from like a production, right? So again, the science is tremendous. So you have one gene that drives a cancer, and HER2 positive breast cancers used to be terribly aggressive. They still are. They're very aggressive, but we have these very good treatments now. They're actually, the outcomes of HER2 positive are better because of these treatments than HER2 negative. Not that you want to be HER2 positive, but if you are, we have very good treatments for them. So that's a gene that the breast cancer is relying on to grow and spread, and then we give them this IV therapy that targets that HER2 production. So I could go on, Gene. There are several, but that's where oncology is going towards. The idea of old chemotherapy, right? Like, is really outdated. I meant to say earlier, a few years from now, so not only will it not matter where your cancer came from, it will matter the mutations, but we can do it all without the bad stuff, the rough stuff, right? The old stuff. And these targeted therapies, these immunotherapies, the combinations of them. Another good example is a medicine called Avastin, which is a VEGF inhibitor. So vascular endothelial growth factor, right? So I'll quiz you on it later, but remember it. So cancer, how does it spread? It grows through mutation, but it gets into your blood, and so it relies on developing new blood growth, right? So Avastin came out also about 20 years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago. And that is a very targeted therapy. It's given with chemotherapy, but it targets blood vessel growth. So it stops the abnormal blood vessel growth of cancers, right? So we give it with chemotherapy, but and so nowadays there's a lot of trials looking at, do we really even need this the old chemotherapy, the bad stuff, that's what I call it. Can we give Avastin that blocks the blood vessel growth? Can we give the other mutation that's associated with that cancer? So I picture myself in, I don't know, maybe 10 years from now, maybe less, not telling Mr. Smith that he has prostate cancer or colon cancer, but that you do have a cancer with XYZ mutation, and I'm going to give you 3 drugs to target those mutations, right? And those might be the same mutations that Mrs. Jones has in a different kind of cancer, but we might have 3 pills or 1 pill that targets all 3. I mean, that's where this is going. It's not too far fetched. So, yeah.
So I'm a two-time veteran of your program up there.
Oh.
And actually, almost 20 years ago, received a monoclonal antibody that changed my life.
Rituximab?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm kind of, rather than a question, I guess I'm going to give you a sales pitch, which is, in the aftermath of those treatments, one of the things that we have here in Greeley that I know you know about, hundreds of people, if not thousands, have benefited from the UNC Rehab Center.
Oh, yeah.
And as we've learned, that's in jeopardy now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to get out there with an appeal to, I mean, we hear MD Anderson and we think that's an amazing resource that can it be brought to bear for us here in this community to help us connect with the rehab center on campus, with the research they're doing, and keep
Yeah.
it going. So
Yeah.
like I said, it's very self-serving, but
No, that-
not
that's
just
a
for
great
me,
point.
I think there's hundreds of people.
I think that's an excellent point. I've actually talked to a few folks over there, and you know, I don't speak for Banner, but I can. There's things that we can do. But yes, I think so. You know, we talk about cancer survivors and what that journey is, and in the old days, right, we would say you're going to be too tired to do anything. Sit back and just take it easy. You know, you're going to be too tired, right? Well, what happens is, and actually MD Anderson has led the way in the research with this, is it's called sarcopenia, which is sarco is muscle, so muscle thinning. Penia means small, thinning, right? So what happens is, and multiple studies have looked at this, is cancer patients in particular are very prone to losing muscle strength. When they lose muscle strength, they tolerate chemo less. So now I have a big incentive here. So I want you to get the therapy that I think you need the best. And if you're too weak or not strong enough to get it, that's to your detriment. So multiple studies have looked at maintaining strength during, and especially during, but also after chemotherapy. And so that's a very important part. Now, and at UNC, I send a lot of patients over there. I love it. I think it's great because the patients love it. You know, you guys do a comprehensive exam, and they look at balance, neuropathy, strength. It's a very it's unlike when you go to like a normal physical therapy. If you have a stroke or something, you need to get stronger in your arm. Unlike that kind of rehab, this is a more comprehensive total body. So they do a great job over there. I send a lot of patients during chemo. And so the idea of just sit back, you're going to be too tired, that's not good enough. We need to get our patients up, moving around, keep their strength up, because ultimately they'll do better, they'll get more chemo, they'll tolerate it better, they won't get as sick, and so it really feeds on itself. So I support the program very much, and we just are beginning discussions on seeing what we can do and how we can help. Yes. So.
You said cancer hides. Where does it hide? And why does it stop hiding?
Where does it hide?
Earlier you said cancer hides.
Yes.
Now our question is, where does it hide? And why does it stop hiding?
So where does it hide is an interesting question. We think it hides in the blood, turns out, okay? Again, the blood vessel growth, that's what's feeding on, but it goes into organs. The reason why you don't see it or feel it, and even a CAT scan, you could have a CAT scan, tomorrow and not have any cancer, and 6 months from now have a cancer. And people say, well, how does that happen? Well, a CAT scan is going to pick up about, in order to have a 1 centimeter, so half an inch, that's about 1 million cells. Okay, so you need almost that level. So by the time I see it on a CAT scan, there's about
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's in the PET scan.
yeah, or a CAT scan or a PET scan or anything like that. Yeah. So by the time it shows up on a PET scan or a CAT scan, a 1 centimeter, about half an inch, that's pretty small. That's over 1 million cells. So that's when it stops hiding, is kind of when we pick it up on scans. Most cancers, though, don't have symptoms. They don't have all these symptoms that you think. Some do. Sometimes you'll feel a mass. A lot of times you won't. And so certain cancers, like we mentioned, pancreatic is notorious for not having not a single symptom until it's way too late. So then all of a sudden it shows up. It starts affecting organ function. People show up with liver failure. They're yellow and they're jaundiced. It's because it's progressed too far.
So it hides in the bloodstream?
Well, so that
In the blood wall?
yeah. So that's an interesting. I don't think I could give you.
That's right. I'm very curious.
So I'll tell you one thing: we are developing a cancer blood screening, cancer screening in the blood that can detect very, very little amounts of cancer. But it can hide anywhere. I don't know that I can give you an answer. Like it can hide in organs that it comes from, right? So here's a good example. So if you live in Japan, your risk for colon cancer, very little. They don't have colon cancer in Japan. Okay, if you take that same Japanese or Korean individual, move them to the U.S. or a Western country, within 10 years, they do have colon cancer. Why? Well, their diet. So red meat. Okay, I know we live in Greeley, and I like my beef as just as well as anyone else. But red meat causes colon cancer. So where is it hiding? It's not so much hiding somewhere, but it's.
That was your word.
I know.
I had melanoma here in 2007. I had it here in 2016. Suddenly I have it here in my armpit, and I have metastatic melanoma in my lungs.
Yes.
So where has it been sitting, and why did it decide to stop sitting?
And melanoma that's exactly the issue with melanoma is, it started up on the scalp or on the eye.
This is sun damage, and this is sun damage.
Right.
Now it's
Right.
place.
Melanoma that's been the issue. I don't know I can give you an answer. I don't think we have an answer as to why all of a sudden it just went to where it did. I don't think I could give you that answer. But melanoma is one that years later, it could be 20, 30 years later, it can show up like that. The good news is, like I just said, we have a lot of good therapy. Hopefully you're on one of them. But I don't know I don't think I could give you an answer to that as far as why it hides like that. Melanoma evades the immune system, and it does. I don't know why. I don't think I could give you an answer as to why that happened. Sorry, I can't. But yeah, melanoma does do that more so than many other cancer. So, what other questions? Any other questions?
This is kind of a bummer question, I think. So medicine has advanced. Is our insurance company, are they advancing as well? Or are they paying for these very specialized treatments and research? I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes, they are. And so so because of all the research that goes on with cancer, we have large national guidelines, and those guidelines help us. They help our patients. So those guidelines are the standard of care that pretty much everyone should get, whether you're at MD Anderson or you're not. And so there's a certain level. Okay, once these drugs become available, they get FDA approved. A lot of times now, it's a pretty quick process. So there's a difference between experimental drugs, which a lot of insurance companies may or may not cover, versus standard therapies. Okay, and a lot of our guidelines talk about first-line therapies. They don't limit us to if there's 6 drugs that are available first-line therapy. And if we think one's better, so most of the times I don't run into problems from an insurance side of things. But here's an interesting, so on the infusion. So if I bring you in to give you an infusion, that's going to be pretty much paid for by your insurance company. Where the issue is, where we run into the rub, is the pills, right? Everyone wants a pill for their cancer. But I also tell patients that gets through your Part D in Medicare or your prescription drug copay. That is different. It's way more expensive to get you that pill than it would be to give you the IV, right? Because that all of a sudden is not generic at all, and it is, again, billed through your prescription drug plan. So these pharmacies mail them to you as a prescription drug, and so that gets very expensive. They cover it, right? But you still have your out of pocket for your drugs, for your just like you go to antibiotics and you get you pay for Augmentin or something. You may pay $20 for that Augmentin, but you're paying several thousands of dollars for these pills. So the oral oncolytics is what we call that is an issue, big issue. It's the out-of-pocket costs can be very high. So, we have a staff that's what they do. That's all they do. They deal with the pill, chemo, and what's the insurance going to cover, and what's your out-of-pocket cost. And then Will Good, he's a great, one of our great staff over there. His job, I mean, he literally finds like all these grant money, Leukemia Lymphoma Foundation, Melanoma Foundation, the drug companies sometimes will, so, I mean, a lot of patients have to rely on that. It's very expensive to get you that pill, as opposed to the IV, that's all covered. You don't probably pay anything for that, out of pocket, So it's different, the way that's billing, and there needs to be something to change on that, because most of these medicines are going to pills. And that, everyone thinks, oh, that's great, right? And it is, it's convenient, but I mean, it's way more expensive.
Do you find the insurance companies listening to the progress that's made with the advances in pills as opposed to other treatment methods? Are you making any headway?
No, it's a big problem. It's all has to do with how they build. There's not a separate, oncology drug prescription plan, right? So, Medicare is a great example. Medicare is a good insurance program. If you have Medicare, you're lucky to have Medicare in many sense of the word, but when your Part D kicks in, there's a huge donut hole, right? You'll probably all are familiar that you're gonna have to pay several $1,000s before even that Part D kicks in. And these are pills that I just described to you, people take for years, right? 10, 20 years sometimes. That's an issue. So I don't know that the drug companies, I haven't seen much progress on that. I mean, of all the progress I just described to you, that's probably not one of them. Because, this all hit them probably, I mean, I don't know. I guess we could have another discussion, maybe another topic can be redesign of our insurance system sometime, but I don't want to get into too much. But boy, it's a crazy thing. I mean, it's because of how it's billed. I mean, if we build it through our chemo infusion, it would be under Part A, and that would be all covered. That's great. But the Part D is a different issue. But Carol.
So, as I understand it, cancer is like a gene mutation that can be caused by different things. So what about environmental factors or stress or bad diet or?
So I think all the above. So people ask me, actually, remember that first handshake I told you, right? Within 5 minutes, someone's going to ask me, why did I get this? I know that. Maybe 2 minutes. What did I do to get this? I run, I'm a vegan, whatever it is. I mean, I often don't have an answer for you, just like you, sir. Why do I have this? I mean, sun exposure maybe for melanoma, but oftentimes it's a lot of different things. So most cancers are not hereditary, okay? 90% are not. So people think it's, so there's a small percentage that's truly hereditary, meaning it's, my grandfather, his brother, my mom, her sister, there are families like that, but most aren't, right? So if you go back to breast cancer, that's the most common cancer. When a girl's born today, she has a 12% risk for breast cancer just by being born, right? 1 in 8 will get breast cancer. What does that tell you? That tells you it's a lot of things, and I don't think I could tell you it's, certain things that she was exposed to. It's a lot. So it's diet, it's environmental. But, I've been amazed too, because I see people take hundreds of supplements and they run 50, 60 miles a week, which is more than I run in a year maybe. And, and then they get cancer. And then, the person who you think, there's no rhyme or reason to it. I don't think I could tell you. But yes, there are certain things. So, sorry if you're a smoker in the room, but, lung cancer, yes, that's linked to smoking. But there are also people who get lung cancer who don't smoke, right? So I just gave you the example of the red meat from someone who she transplanted, someone who lives in Japan, bring them here. Within 10 years, their risk for colon cancer is just like the average person because of the diet. So there are things but there are also things that, again, if we all have that sword hanging over us in that sense, that sometimes I'm not too convinced that almost anything matters because, yes, we want to live a healthy lifestyle for other reasons, but I don't think I could tell you if you ran 50 miles a week, you're not going to get cancer. No one could tell you that. So I think it's a lot of things. It's environmental for sure. dietary for sure, combinations of things for sure, and then genetics a little bit. So and then sometimes it's just what happens is all these sporadic cases that are not hereditary. It's a lifetime of various things that add up, and then all of a sudden it doesn't take much. It's interesting because one DNA repair that didn't happen leads to 2 DNA repairs that didn't happen. It leads to 3 DNA repairs that didn't happen, and all of a sudden, years down the line, you get cancer, and that's a hard thing to explain to patients to say, But what I usually tell them is, look, this is not your fault. You didn't do anything, or you did not do anything that made you have this. We'll deal with this. We'll take care of it. We can't go back and blame ourselves for something we did or didn't do, something our mom exposed us to. So that's what I tell patients. But yeah, with that first handshake, it's a heavy handshake. But I know in the first minute or two, maybe 5 minutes, someone's going to ask me, "Why did I get this? How the heck did this happen?" So but the answer is, sometimes we don't know. I don't know. It's a lot of things, but we can't go back and blame ourselves. We go forward with the treatments that we have.
Yeah, I want to thank you first of all for just a really fascinating talk. Very inspirational, and let's hope that one day cancer really is cured.
Yes.
I kind of have a question about your philosophy as a physician, and you shared a lot about how new science and new medicine, new technologies even, are changing our ability to cure and or to treat cancer. But how do you reconcile your kind of role as a treater or a curer of cancer with the inevitable that there's probably times where patients are not going to be cured, or the family says we can't suffer anymore. And I'm thinking, basically, must be familiar with his work, the book Be Immortal by Atul Gawande, I think, where he talks about how physicians are kind of trained that at all expense we will cure the patient, and curing the patient is the end goal. But sometimes the suffering is just so much, although I'm feeling very optimistic by some of the new cures that you've shared here. So how do you handle those?
So, again, yeah, I will. So what she said was, how do you deal with? I'm putting words in your mouth, but how do you deal with the suffering that's inevitable sometimes? How do you, how do you bring together all these advances, all these new technologies, and at the same time, there are patients who may not be cured, or are suffering, and so you're going through all these advances, all these technologies. So how do you kind of bring that together? How do you deal with that as a physician? And so, again, I did tell you, in the beginning, what people said, what made you go into this? And I told you it's my patients and it's the science. Well, there really is. There's a few times in life that we all remember, right? We all remember our wedding. You're supposed to remember. Don't forget your wedding, right? We remember our wedding dates. Remember the birth of I still picture the birth of my kids. We all have those memories. But we also remember the death of our loved ones, right? We do. We remember when our mom passed away. We remember when our grandfather passed away. We remember where we were. We remember what we said to him. Hopefully we got to say something to him. So there's actually no greater privilege than to be a part of that process, right? So yes, and I also tell patients, because again, depending on the stage, within these first handshakes of visits, that does come up, and it needs to come up. And so I'm a big believer. I'm very transparent. I will tell you what your stage is. I will tell you. But I usually ask patients, what do you want to know from me, right? Because some people aren't ready for it right then, and maybe they know, but they don't want to hear it right then. Some people say, you tell me everything you know. I want to know about it. And so I'm conscientious about the delivery of that and when that happens, because I just told you there are a few cancers that we can't necessarily treat very well, and we don't treat very well, and we don't have good cures for. And so when I know that I'm going into that room, I know that, that's, it's on me to make sure that patient gets that information. How we do it and when, I want the patient to be ready for it. Most patients want to know what's ahead. They want to know this river raft, right? They want to know, okay, what's the deal here? Do I have 6 months to live? And some cancers, that's what we're talking about. So to me, there's no greater privilege than be a part of that and help guide that discussion. And the reality is I also tell patients, okay, I'll give you an average, but I'm not your maker, right? I don't control that, first of all. So don't come back to me 5 years from now and you told me I was going to die in 6 months. Well, I was wrong. Okay, great. Good for you, But I do tell patients, I'm not your maker, okay? I'll give you averages, but averages are averages, and there's people who do better, and there's people who do worse. But you get a sense of what this is, right? That's one thing. But then if there's new therapies like melanoma, I would say, look, there's a lot of new therapies that we don't even know how well people can do with them too. So that's my usual kind of approach. But in that, I also do try to provide hope somehow, right? So I think people will do well with honesty, people will do well with transparency, but when you take all hope away, that's not exactly what people want. People don't do too well with that. So I do try to provide hope, even in that time. I've had patients who show up in my office, and I have to get them right into hospice because I think they're going to pass away in 2 weeks. I mean, that happens. Okay. Again, there's no greater privilege for me than to help that family, because oftentimes by then you're actually probably helping the family more than anyone else. But the patient, we have a great palliative care team that focuses on symptoms, pain. I mean, a lot of times we'll get the palliative care team involved early for a lot of cancers, not just the end stage cancer, and they'll see those patients down in the room, in the infusion room with us, and they come down there and see them with us. They focus on their pain, they focus on their nausea. So we are very cognizant of that. We want to make sure that no matter what stage you are in therapy, there's a lot of symptoms involved with therapy, and we want to address those symptoms. But especially when you're talking about the dying patient or the patient that there's a for me, again, I say that not lightly, but that's a great privilege to take part in that time of life where you're going to remember those 3 things in your life, right? That's a privilege to be a part of that. And to do that in a way that still leaves some hope. There's always hope. Hope for what? I mean, there's a lot of things we can get hope out of almost any situation, I think. So we want to provide hope. We want to make sure they're not suffering. We want to improve their quality of life. We want to address the family's needs, the patient's needs. So that's how we do that. I mean, at that point, it doesn't matter about gene therapy. It doesn't matter about immunotherapy. You're sitting there and you're talking about what's going to happen, and the family often knows, the patient often knows, and so. But sometimes that's a journey too. Sometimes that's 2 years away or 3 years away. So we don't go into that every single time, But there is a time when you realize, wow, I don't have any more therapies, right? I just told you about all the therapies that we go on. There is sometimes where we don't have therapies. But we do have the ability to offer compassion, provide hope, relieve suffering, and that's an important part. So I thank you for that question. Does that answer your question? I mean, that's my approach to it. But yeah. What other?
I was curious about earlier you were talking about the cost of the drugs, and I'm guessing that up front they probably cost more because you're paying for the research and development that led to it. So would you say that maybe, let's say 5 years from now, that where the drugs cost today, they become more common, by maybe economies of scale, they would actually go down?
And they will, and that's a good point. So, the typical patent is 7 years, and that's probably about, to get a drug to market, to be successful, it's usually about 20 years of actual research and development. So, I'm not advocating the cost of them. I'm just telling you that what happens in that. But there's a big push for what we call biosimilars. So these aren't generics. So Neulasta is a good example. Neulasta is a shot that we give to people to help their immune system stay up. Well, Neulasta, I think its patent ran up or it's about to run up. There's about 3 versions now of Neulasta that are biosimilar. So the FDA has looked at classes of medicines, like how can a company hold a patent for a class of a medicine, right? That's not, I mean, they own the drug, but not to be able to make it, So a class of a medicine, so they call it biosimilars. So there's a big push for biosimilars, and those cost 70%, 70% less than what the brand name is. And so that's, I think, where the insurance companies probably will play and say, hey, look, these are the same drugs. Why do you have to give Neulasta versus the biosimilar? And I agree. I don't think that you need to. So there's a big push for biosimilars. And then, yes, these patents will run out eventually. And Gleevec's a great example. Gleevec was the granddad. Remember the CML, Gleevec, 20 years is way off patent. But since then, there's been 3 or 4 other ones. Now they're better. They are better than Gleevec, but Gleevec still works. I tell patients, it's like, I could go buy a big Cadillac Escalade or something and come to work with it, but I also drive my Toyota Camry just fine, right? It gets me to work. It's reliable. Gleevec's like a Toyota Camry. It'll do its job, So the reality is, just because it's new doesn't mean it's necessarily better. And so once you start getting multiple agents in a class, the prices do come down. Yeah, you should have a whole nother talk about like insurance, change, how do we change our insurance and payment, and that's a whole nother another talk for another week, I suppose. But any other questions? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. So.